When I was in 4th grade, I was a pioneer on the Oregon Trail. I packed only what was necessary and learned to overcome death and disease. In 6th grade, I was a young woman falsely accused of witchcraft. I was fleeing friends and family in order to escape. In 7th grade, I was a young girl preparing for an arranged marriage, struggling to overcome conflicting ideas of religion and familial beliefs. My freshman year of high school, I was just a student. I went to class, I did my homework, I studied for exams, but I no longer got to experience distant places and expired eras in the classroom. Instead, I merely absorbed and regurgitated the information that I was getting buried in. Students encounter a variety of changes when they come to college. New feelings, new freedoms, new visions of the future. But one often overlooked change is the significantly decreased focus on creative writing as a way to learn information, which ultimately comes at a detriment to important introspective and evaluative skills. I contend this shift happens for 3 main reasons. First, that creative writing is viewed as non-rigorous. Second, that it's not seen as applicable to the STEM fields. And third, my favorite, that it doesn't prepare students for the real world. But this isn't Hamilton College, right? After all, teaching creativity is one of our 8 academic goals at this college. The unfortunate truth is that this promise isn't carried out. In my time here, I've taken classes in 14 different departments. And of those, only 2 classes have been in creative writing and only 1 in the art department. So aside from those 3 classes, I've only taken 7 that have asked me to do any kind of creative work in the curriculum. That means that when I leave campus in May, less than a third of my courses here will have asked me to engage creatively in the material at all. Now, like I mentioned, one of the reasons I think this is the case is because creative writing isn't viewed as a rigorous activity. But in those 7 classes where we did do creative projects, they were usually in lieu of final exams. And that's not because the professors or the classes were easy. It's not because they were trying to give us a break. It was because the professors realized that those types of projects were the best indicators of whether we'd actually meaningfully learned anything. For example, in my language classes, we did improv skits. In my international politics classes, we wrote policy proposals to foreign leaders. In constitutional law, we argued hypothetical cases in front of the Supreme Court. Creative work is not easy. In fact, each of these projects was incredibly difficult precisely because it required that I master the material instead of just being adequate at it. Now, the second issue that I've identified is that it doesn't seem like these types of projects are applicable in the STEM fields. But this just isn't true. For instance, imagine that I'm a physics student and you're trying to teach me about Newton's 3 fundamental laws. You have a couple of options. You could ask me to explain them on an exam or in class, and I could parrot back whatever we talked about during office hours or spit out what I read in the textbook. Or you could ask me to write a story in which those laws weren't all true. Now, there's no way that I can do that unless I actually understand what those laws are and why they're important. Or consider that I'm a chemistry student and we're talking about different types of chemical bonds. Again, I could study the diagrams and memorize the keywords. Or you could ask me to write a story about 2 different relationships that exemplify the differences between covalence and ionic bonds, for instance. I could go on with examples, but the point is that with just a little bit of pedagogical rejuvenation, creative writing can be easily applied in any academic discipline as a way to help both professors figure out what their students have actually learned, but also to help students engage more deeply with the material. Now, the last concern is that creative writing doesn't prepare students for the real world. But let's be honest. Neither does a 15-page paper about the Federalists or a 3-hour sit-down exam. Instead, I'd ask that you consider my personal experience with a significant writing project. About 5 years ago, I put aside 30 days and I wrote a novel. While I can count on one hand the number of people I've let read that novel, to this day it's still one of my proudest accomplishments. And that's not because it was a good novel, it was pretty terrible, but it's because I was able to create this entire world on my own. Because I was able to break off pieces of myself and see how they interacted with each other, how they loved and hurt each other, how they were scared or courageous in the face of adversity. Ultimately, it was a 50,000-word simulation of how I might react in different situations. And while there's a lot of value in this as just an introspective project, it also forced me to ask and address questions of psychology, sociology, philosophy, political theory, in ways that ultimately have shaped my desire to go to law school. Because in addition to just addressing how I might react in different situations, I also had to address and identify societal conflicts that now I want to work to mitigate and resolve in my career. So this experience of writing a novel, it prepared me more for the real world than any exam or essay could. Now, at the end of the day, there are some things that I think we can all agree on in this room. And that's that in May, when our graduates leave the Hill, we hope that they have unparalleled communication skills, that they have practical knowledge of themselves and society, and that they have a desire and a hunger to enact positive change. All of these, albeit lofty goals, can be realized through a commitment to creative writing. Now, to be clear, I'm not advocating that every student should be required to take a creative writing class. Instead, I'm contending that the onus is on educators in every department to readjust and reapproach their pedagogical methods such that they allow for and facilitate creative writing in the classroom.